This is BBC Radio 4 FM. Now, 40 Years Our Queen, presented by Ronald Allison, formerly court correspondent for the BBC and for 5 years Press Secretary to Her Majesty.
Today, February the 6th, we have cause to celebrate. It's the 40th anniversary of the accession of the Queen, of our Queen. And in this programme, we'll be looking back on the 40 years of a reign which has seen such extraordinary changes in almost every aspect of our lives. But, at the beginning most certainly, we need to remember that the mood in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth on February the 6th, 1952, was sombre and solemn. The Queen's father, King George VI, had been admired, respected and loved. His death was a shock, and the sense of loss was real and deep, as was the sympathy felt for the widowed Queen, who had lost her husband, and his young daughter, who succeeded him. King George VI and Queen Elizabeth had sustained the people of Britain throughout the darkest days of the war and the period of austerity that followed. Now it was Queen Elizabeth II who came to the throne. She did so as a young married woman with 2 children, but also as a woman who had already promised us, in a broadcast made on her 21st birthday, that, whether it be long or short, my whole life shall be devoted to your service. And service she has, unfailingly, with diligence and a deep, deep sense of duty. We've all been aware of that, but what only comparatively few of us have seen at first hand is how she has also served us with wit, humour and high intelligence.
I'm not sure people always realise how sharp a sense of humour she has behind the dignified demeanour. Somebody once said that people without a sense of humour oughtn't to be put in charge of anything because they lack proportion and therefore lack judgment. Well, she doesn't fail on that test, and she is very well able to see the absurdity of things.
And I don't think that the public had any idea, thinking now of the time when she actually came to the throne, the public had no idea the sort of person she was at all. And they had no conception of her liveliness, her enormous sense of humour. The fact that this probably isn't still known today, really, is the extent, the incredibly good mimic that she is. And most irreverent sort of approach to life. And they had no idea that at all.
There's a kind of common sense about her thinking that I find quite remarkable. On one other occasion, she'd been in between 2 sittings on a portrait to visit some special coal mine in Yorkshire, some model coal mine just been opened, and she'd been taken down and donned with all the siren suits and overalls and helmet and lamps. And she said it's quite ludicrous, she said, and this I think is a great insight into her awareness. She said the lamp on the helmet is here, which shines ahead. And of course, where you want it is at your feet because you're falling over the coal. So she said, I came out with a stiff neck because the light had to shine down on my feet while someone was talking to me. And I thought, well, that's absolutely right. I mean, she could almost redesign the helmet, isn't it? You don't need it down. That's what you're falling over is in front of you.
Wit, compassion and common sense, as experienced by Lord Runcie, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Brabourne, a close friend of both the Queen and Prince Philip, and David Poole, who has painted her portrait on several occasions. At the time of her father's death, the Queen, with Prince Philip, was in Kenya, we called it Kenya then, at the start of what had been planned to be an extensive tour of the Commonwealth. Martin Charteris, her private secretary who was travelling with her, saw her soon after she'd been told by her husband of the death of her father.
And that was an extraordinary occasion, which I shall never forget. I just walked into the drawing room, and in the far corner was a writing table. And sitting at the writing table was the young lady who I had last seen in her blue jeans and all that, the princess, looking like the Queen. And I sort of did, the head bow and said, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." She said, "Thank you very much," and said, "Yeah," and gave me some telegrams to send off. And there we were. And I tell you what I think the thing was, that she accepted her destiny, totally. She was very fond of her father and very fond of her mother. But she said to herself, I think I am queen and I've got a backbone and my God, I'm going to keep it stiff. And she never for a second moaned. I think she welcomed her destiny. She was never overcome by it in any way. She's not a sentimental woman. Strong sentiment, strong emotions, no sentimentality, no slush, no sugar, backbone, courage.
That backbone, that courage, still so evident today, was immediately recognised as the new Queen and Prince Philip returned to Heathrow to be greeted by her Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. In those early months of 1952, Britain had still not fully emerged from the immediate post-war era, even though it was 6 years since the Allied victories over both Germany and Japan, and 1951 had seen the Festival of Britain. Generally, pre-war and wartime values and attitudes still prevailed, although many were most certainly being questioned and in some cases challenged. The radio and the cinema still provided most people with their entertainment. The era of the television set was still to come, as were the ages of the refrigerator, the washing machine, and package tours abroad. Council estates were still being built on the assumption that the people who lived in them wouldn't own cars. The Labour government of Clement Attlee, elected with a huge majority in 1945 and re-elected with a tiny one in 1950, had been replaced the following year by Winston Churchill's first peacetime administration. The Cold War was a reality in Europe. There was a hot one in Korea. The Commonwealth was rapidly developing from the old empire, and in those countries, still without self-government, independence movements were forces to be reckoned with. At home, the Queen's first concern was the funeral of her father and supporting her mother and sister in their grief. She also had to arrange her own household and advisers, establishing her unique relationship with those who worked for her. As the Queen and Prince Philip settled into their new life in Buckingham Palace, thoughts turned forward to the coronation. It was to be nearly 18 months after her accession before the service was held in Westminster Abbey, but it was one in which the entire nation was then able to share. Churchill and the Cabinet advised against the television cameras being allowed into the Abbey. The Queen thought otherwise, and her view prevailed. And so the majority of the people in Britain, those not on the streets of London on the day itself, that is, settled down, curtains drawn, for an unprecedented day's viewing on television, then of course in black and white. On the day the Queen was crowned, television came of age.
Madam, is Your Majesty willing to take the oath?
I am willing.
Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Union of South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon, and of your possessions and the other territories to any of them belonging or pertaining, according to their respective laws and customs?
I solemnly promise so to do.
Will you, to your power, cause law and justice in mercy to be executed in all your judgments?
I will.
Television was to change the habits of a nation. It was rapidly to become the main source of news and entertainment for more and more people, and the Queen and Prince Philip were well aware of its potential. They saw it as a dramatic example of the way in which the world was changing, and they realized it was essential that the monarchy, even if not exactly up with the times, should never be too far behind them. The Queen, who had been prepared from the age of 10 to fulfil her destiny, had nevertheless remained comparatively sheltered from what we like to think of as real life. Prince Philip, on the other hand, had been much more directly involved in the world. He had ideas, views, suggestions that were refreshing and challenging. The Queen listened and accepted many of them.
First, I think she needed reassurance, and that was something that the Duke of Edinburgh provided with his robust personality. He gave her tremendous support. And I think this wasn't generally known, but there is no doubt that she valued that support immensely, and it was very important to her, I think, in carrying out her duties.
In Prince Philip, the Queen had a husband and the nation had a consort who, while having no official role of his own, most certainly did have a restless, active nature, an ever-inquiring mind, and the strongest of personalities. There were bound to be some stimulating, if not controversial, moments. Lord Brabourne.
Much of the credit must go to Prince Philip for the way in which he has been able to supremely play his role by getting out into the world and playing his own role and not following the Queen around. And the knowledge and information that he has required and the feeling and what he's heard has been of extreme value to the Queen and to her advisers.
Nevertheless, the reign began with the Queen by and large following the traditions of her father and grandfather. Debutantes came down the Mall with their parents in the rolls to be officially presented at court. Invitations to the garden parties went mainly to the great and the good. Mayors and Lord Mayors were there, but not many of those who worked in the boroughs. And at Sandringham and Balmoral, country life continued much as it had before the war. Margaret Rhodes is a long-time friend of the Queen.
They all, as a family, adore picnic life. So at Balmoral, for instance, probably 5 nights out of 7, you have a picnic dinner out in some little log cabin somewhere out in the woods, you know. And Prince Philip will cook. The Queen will lay the table with any of us helping her. And she's very hot stuff on her washing up and cleaning things much more than I would ever bother to do myself. She's just loves country life. I mean, I think if she didn't happen to be Queen, she'd have a lovely house in the country, and I think she just would surround herself with dogs and horses and ponies and that sort of thing, you know.
Soon, though, there were to be changes. The Debs found that they had had their day. People who could never have expected to visit the palace began to do so. But as Britain came out of the austerity of the 50s and into the new world of the 60s, as Harold Macmillan told us we had never had it so good and the world listened to the Beatles, and swinging London was the place for everyone to be, especially Americans, then, perhaps surprisingly, there was some disenchantment with the monarchy, and critical voices were raised in Parliament and the press. By the end of the decade, even Panorama on BBC One asked the question, the monarchy? Do we need it? While another long-time critic of the monarchy was the Labour MP, Willie Hamilton.
If the monarchy were only the Queen and her husband and the children, and they were recognised for what they are, sort of glorified civil servants, and none of the hangers-on, and we paid them civil service wages, and they were properly taxed. This is another curse, an indefensible aspect of the matter. The tax privileges that they get are obscene. They're obscene, and they can't pretend to unite the nation so long as they enjoy those privileges and don't prefer to give them up of their own volition. So there are all these factors which militate against the monarchy, and I think the remedy's in their own hands.
His was very much a lone voice, though. The majority of the nation, according to all the polls at the time, were still very much pro the monarchy. Their views perhaps reinforced by the television documentary Royal Family, first shown in 1969. It was here that television and the monarchy came together in a spectacular way. The Queen agreed that BBC cameras could film and record a year of her life, showing both the family scenes Christmas and the children round the Christmas tree, as well as the professional moments of her life as constitutional monarch. Lord Brabourne initiated the idea, he talked to Prince Philip, who talked to the Queen, and filming began in 1968, directed by the late Richard Corsten, a distinguished documentary producer at the BBC.
But that was how it came about, was really with a view to trying to get the public to get a feeling of what they were like as people. And there's no doubt that it did. I mean, to a bigger degree than I'd ever hoped or thought possible at that time, because once they did it, they did it properly. And there are one or two sequences in it when you see it today, which really still are quite surprising as to the way they came over. And the effect was absolutely amazing. I remember being told by a member of the royal party that went to the next royal visit to Australia, where there was a totally different attitude. And this is when the walkabout started. And these were directly attributable in the eyes of the fact of the press secretary at that time, that this was due to the film. And that sort of feeling of it was possible to get close and in touch with this, what had up to now had been a sort of distant figurehead.
Making a film which had such an effect might seem simple enough. But even for someone as accustomed to being in the public eye as the Queen, to suddenly have a cameraman, a sound recordist, a lighting technician, and a director constantly in attendance, well, it takes some getting used to, particularly in those situations when normally the Queen would be with just one other person.
It was, yes, very difficult for her to start with, indeed. Not so much Prince Philip, he was a natural. But the Queen had to sort of persuade herself that this was okay, you know, not just what other people told her. And she found that she could cope very quickly. I think she found actually the cameras much less, in fact I know she found the cameras much less difficult than the sound. It was the worry of, being immediate of what you were saying, what you were actually doing, I think was more of a worry to her, and suddenly having a microphone shoved under her face, under her nose, in the middle of a conversation. That, I think, was quite a worry to her. And I remember the first time it happened, I remember her telling me the shock she had when she was at a Prime Minister's conference. She said, for the first time, actually, there she was talking to one of her Prime Ministers, and suddenly this microphone shot up between them. And she said, that really was a shock. I said, this is what we've come to, you know. But of course she carried it off perfectly.
The impact of the film was enormous, giving the general public, for the first time, a close-up of the monarch at work. Perhaps surprisingly, a socialist Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, had no doubts about the value of our system of government.
When I deal with presidents, elected presidents, or some unelected presidents, I'm sorry for the poor devils. They are head of state and they are head of government. It's terribly important in my view. I do believe in this principle of having a head of state who is above all party, who cannot be accused or suspected of party maneuvering or prejudice. And take a case like the Nixon case, a tragic case. What he did as a politician, of course, brought the whole concept of the presidency, the headship of state, into disrepute. Now, I don't think you would have I hope you never would have a prime minister of any party getting into a mess of that kind. But if he did, life would go on. The waters would close over him very, very quickly indeed, because nothing would affect the presidency. In other words, the headship of state, in our case, the monarchy. Quite separate.
As well as being our head of state, the Queen has many other roles. She's the head of the Church of England, the head of law and of the lawmakers, the fount of honour, the head of the armed services. Servicemen and women take their oath to her, not to a Prime Minister or to any government in power at any time. She remains the focal point of stability for all of us who remain monarchists, who believe and support not just a Queen who has served us for 40 years, but the system which has survived 1,000 years or more. Although non-political, the Queen is certainly politically well aware. Every day she receives and reads the contents of those red boxes from government departments and dispatches from overseas, and nearly every Tuesday evening the Prime Minister of the day visits and reports to her.
She was, of course, always remarkably well informed. In part, this was due to the fact that she has informants and advisors from all over the world. Every governor-general, every governor, all her prime ministers, all the ambassadors, all provide information. And I believe she was always very assiduous in reading the reports which were sent to her. Added to that, her own personal experience of travel, not only throughout the Commonwealth, but through the rest of the world. And you had there a mass of information, always very well ordered and sorted, which few other people in the world had.
I always remember one occasion during a warm summer evening when we conducted our audience walking around the grounds of Buckingham Palace. And at one moment she paused, bent down, picked a flower and gave it to me. And that endeared her to me for life. I would do anything for her.
Looking back, do you recall being the recipient of good advice from the Queen on any occasions?
I remember seeking advice, and her reaction was different on different occasions. I remember one occasion when I sat there scratching my head and outlining a problem and saying, "I simply don't know what to do. What would you do?" And her response was, "That's what you're paid for." On another occasion, however, because she cared so much about the Commonwealth, when I outlined to her, oddly enough, at a dinner at the Italian embassy, a problem about Rhodesia and what I was minded to do, I had a letter the next day saying that the Queen thought that what I was proposing to do was absolutely right and encouraging me to go ahead and do it when I'd said that I was a little dubious as to which course I should follow. So I think she would take either line depending on what she thought was appropriate. And certainly she gave me good advice, and she also gave it to other Commonwealth Prime Ministers. She cared very much about the Commonwealth. And I think that she had a great role to play because she came to the throne at a transient period from empire and colonies to Commonwealth and independence. She grew up with that. And so as she matured, so did the statesmen of the Commonwealth. And I think they had the same respect and, I believe, affection for her that I think I had, certainly as a Prime Minister, and most other people who met her.
Edward Heath and Lord Callaghan. And as Lord Callaghan emphasised, the Commonwealth has been of major importance to the Queen from the time of her accession. Sir Sonny Ramphel was Secretary-General of the Commonwealth for many years.
I think the first thing to remember is that although she inherited something that was already in transition, she came to the big transition moment quite quickly. In fact, it was just a short while before she came to the throne that the big decision, which allowed India to remain a member of the Commonwealth, changed things quite substantially. The Queen was no longer the Queen to whom every person in the Commonwealth owed allegiance. India was becoming a republic, so was Pakistan, and making an accommodation with this in the interest of strengthening the Commonwealth was a very big thing. So it was the transition from the Queen as sovereign to the Queen as head of the Commonwealth. It had begun with the King, but it fell to her to really make it work. And that, I think, has been a monumental contribution. It has been a life's work. It has been done in a manner which I think has made the Commonwealth possible in its modern form. And it's something for which, so long as the Commonwealth subsists, we will thank her.
The nation and the Commonwealth thanked her many times and over many years, and with good reason. She is the staunch centre of the Commonwealth and has helped hold it together at difficult times. Those photographs of her and the Commonwealth heads of government show that strength and dignity. A smiling, elegant figure in the centre of a large group of people of power, men and women, mostly men. A woman herself of power and majesty. But then, in a Guildhall speech on the 25th anniversary of her marriage, she revealed that humour and wit, perhaps seen in public all too rarely.
I think everybody really will concede that on this, of all days, I should begin my speech with the words, "My husband and I." We, and by that I mean both of us, are most grateful. We're most grateful to you for your generous welcome and for the kind and thoughtful way in which you have expressed the city's loyalty and affection. A marriage begins by joining man and wife together. But this relationship between two people, however deep at the time, needs to develop and mature with the passing years. For that, it must be held firm in the web of family relationships between parents and children, between grandparents and grandchildren, between cousins, aunts, and uncles. When the bishop was asked what he thought about sin, he replied with simple conviction that he was against it. If I am asked today what I think about family life after 25 years of marriage, I can answer with equal simplicity and conviction, I am for it.
And not only for family life, but for help and support for all those close to her.
She is somebody who one could go to if one was in some sort of trouble. And I think you'll get some very sensible advice. Because though she's queen, she actually knows how ordinary people live in some miraculous way, even though she lives in a rather rarefied atmosphere and doesn't actually normally have to hoover the bedroom or put the dishes in the washing machine. She's perfectly aware of how all of us live and can totally enter into whatever the problems may be that you've got. And I think would give one very sensible advice. And you know, the other thing is that she, which I don't think anybody knows, I mean, but she helps the most enormous number of people financially. People who've perhaps worked for her at some stage or members of her family. And never a word is known about that, but she does help people in difficulty that way a lot.
A woman and a queen to celebrate and to rejoice in. And in 1977, the year of her Silver Jubilee, that opportunity came. But her popularity, as her then private secretary, now Lord Charteris, explains, wasn't entirely understood by government and civil servants.
Well, the attitude of the government, of course, we must, yes, 25 years on the throne, well, we must do whatever is necessary, but I think we want to spend too much money on it, and I don't think anybody's particularly interested in it. And actually, I, having served the Queen then for more than 25 years, I was able to say, look, you've got this wrong. You have no idea of what the public appeal is going to be. And luckily they listened. And I was right and they were wrong, because it was a huge success, wasn't it? You know. And I think that the Queen had a love affair with the country that year. Do you remember the way she used to walk down between the crowds with her arms full of flowers and then hand them to you or me or somebody? And I mean, and that seraphic look of happiness on her face. She was actually very, very much moved by it. Got a bit tired now and then, but it was a great year. Marvellous.
The Queen, as Lord Charteris said, did indeed have a love affair with the whole country. And she found, during the year, both the time and the courage to visit Northern Ireland.
During these last 2 days, I have met men and women from all walks of life, including many who have been directly affected by the violence. I have been encouraged by talking to widows who, despite their personal loss, look forward without bitterness to the time when peace will return. There are hopeful signs of reconciliation and understanding. Policemen and soldiers have told me of the rare cooperation they are receiving. I have sensed a common bond and a shared hope for the future.
But the Queen cannot just be celebrated as head of state for us in the United Kingdom. As we've heard, she heads and brings together the peoples of the Commonwealth. But far beyond the Commonwealth, worldwide, she's also known and respected.
If there was not a monarchy in Great Britain, I do not believe U.S.-British relations would have as firm a foundation. I really believe that. The existence of the monarchy in Great Britain enhances U.S.-British diplomatic, military, economic relations. There are other very important countries in Europe and elsewhere where there is no monarchy, and our relationship with those countries is less stable, more fluid. Our relationship, that of the United States with Britain, is different because we understand and honor the monarchy, but we also have a political relationship with whatever political party controls the day-to-day operations. So U.S.-British relationships are tied together not only by the day-to-day political give and take, but by this higher authority, so to speak, the monarchy itself.
The views of former U.S. President Gerald Ford. Equally impressed is the former American Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger.
The Queen, of course, has a very peculiar position. I don't know any other head of state who is informed so much by the cabinet and who has so much moral prestige as the Queen. So one cannot really compare her to any other head of state that I have ever met. I found her extraordinarily well informed, with extremely good judgment. And I had an occasion to sit next to her at a number of dinners, and I was really impressed by her knowledge and by her insight and by her judgment of people, which was sometimes a little wicked, but very, very good.
And from the views of two world leaders to those of two people who have had the opportunity to be close to the Queen in private moments, the artist David Poole and the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Runcie.
She changes quite dramatically, the actual facial expression, within seconds from when she's serious, looking rather grim and heavy and severe and quite intimidating, and then you crack a joke or whatever, then, and if it appeals to her, within seconds she looks 30 years younger, because she's got that most incredible kind of laugh, hasn't she? Her eyes light up and when something tickles her, and she really roars with laughter. And that dramatic change is very difficult to pin an average aspect down between the two. You don't want one or the other. You're really trying to paint what is the real person, not just happiness in one moment and sort of gloom on the other, but something in the middle. And that makes her difficult to actually pin down, I think.
I think that the Queen, as a focus of unity in the life of the nation, has had a remarkable influence, an influence on those who from time to time wield positions of power. She has set a standard for them, and also she has managed to be a center of stability for many people who find life confusing and too quick for them, and some sense of hope she has engendered for those people who are in danger of reacting because they think they've been left at the bottom of the heap. I think that her mixture of majesty on the ceremonial occasions and genuine and informal curiosity about how different people, and particularly people having a hard time, are making out, that's something to do with the unity.
And so we celebrate 40 remarkable years in which our Queen has reigned with wisdom and dedication, steering the monarchy through times of great social and economic upheaval, and finding herself, like her father before her, admired, respected, and loved.
When I was 21, I pledged my life to the service of our people, and I asked for God's help to make good that vow. Although that vow was made in my salad days when I was green in judgment, I do not regret nor retract one word of it.
"40 Years Our Queen" was written and presented by Ronald Allison. It was produced by Helen Fry.